Nannie Doss was born on November 4th, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, which is now part of Anniston. She was the daughter of Louisa and James F. Hazel. Nannie was one of 5 children, with 1 brother and 3 sisters. Both Nannie and her mother despised James, who was a controlling and abusive husband and father. He forced his children to work on the family farm and did not allow them to attend school, resulting in Nannie's poor academic performance. When Nannie was 7 years old, she sustained a head injury during a family train trip to southern Alabama. The train stopped suddenly, causing her to hit her head on the metal bar of the seat in front of her. This accident led to severe headaches, blackouts, and depression, which Nannie later attributed to her mental instability. As a child, Nannie's favorite pastime was reading her mother's romance magazines and fantasizing about her own romantic future, particularly enjoying the Lonely Hearts column. However, her father imposed strict rules on the Hazel sisters, forbidding them from wearing makeup or attractive clothing. He also prohibited them from attending dances or other social events. Nannie married for the first time at age 16 to Charlie Braggs, a co-worker at a linen factory. With her father's approval, they wed after 4 months of dating. Braggs was the only son of a single mother who insisted on living with him after the marriage. Nannie later wrote, "I married as my father wished in 1921 to a boy I only knew for about 4 or 5 months. He had no family except for an unwed mother who completely took over my life after we married. She never saw anything wrong with what she did, but she would have spells. She wouldn't even let my own mother stay overnight." Braggs' mother dominated much of his attention and severely restricted Nannie's activities. Between 1923 and 1927, the couple had 4 daughters. The stressed-out Nannie began drinking heavily, and her casual smoking habit turned into a serious addiction. Both Nannie and Charlie suspected each other of infidelity, and Charlie often disappeared for days at a time. In 1927, their 2 middle daughters died of suspected food poisoning. Shortly thereafter, Braggs fled with their firstborn daughter, Melvina, leaving the newborn Florine behind. Not long after, Braggs' mother passed away, and Nannie took a job at a cotton mill to support herself and Florine. In the summer of 1928, Braggs returned with Melvina and a divorcee who had a child of her own. Nannie and Charlie soon divorced, and Nannie took her 2 daughters back to her mother's home. Braggs always claimed he left Nannie because he was afraid of her. Nannie's second husband was Robert Franklin Harrelson, whom she met and married in 1929. They settled in Jacksonville with her daughters, Melvina and Florine. Shortly after their marriage, Nannie discovered Harrelson was an alcoholic with a criminal record for assault. Despite these issues, their marriage endured for 16 years. In 1943, Melvina gave birth to a son, Robert Lee Haynes. 2 years later, she had another baby, but the child died shortly after birth. Exhausted from labor and groggy from ether, Melvina thought she saw her visiting mother, Nannie, stick a hat pin into the baby's head. When Melvina asked her husband and sister about it, they said Nannie had told them the baby was dead, and they noticed she was holding a pin. However, the doctors could not provide a definitive explanation. The grieving parents grew apart, and Melvina began dating a soldier whom Nannie disapproved of. While Melvina was visiting her father after a particularly nasty fight with her mother, her son Robert died mysteriously under Nannie's care on July 7, 1945. The death was diagnosed as asphyxia from unknown causes. 2 months later, Nannie collected the $500 life insurance policy she had taken out on Robert. In 1945, Harrelson sexually assaulted Nannie. The following day, she placed rat poison in his corn whiskey jar, and he passed away that evening. Nannie encountered her third husband, Arlie Lanning, through another Lonely Hearts column while traveling in Lexington, North Carolina, and they married just 3 days later. Similar to her previous husband, Lanning was an alcoholic and a womanizer. However, in this marriage, Nannie often vanished for extended periods, sometimes for months on end. Yet, when she was present, she portrayed the image of a devoted housewife. When Lanning passed away, purportedly due to heart failure, the townspeople rallied around Nannie at his funeral. Shortly thereafter, the couple's house, which had been bequeathed to Lanning's sister, mysteriously burned down. The insurance payout went to Nannie, who swiftly deposited the funds. Following the death of Lanning's mother in her sleep, Nannie departed North Carolina and sought refuge at her sister Dovie's home. However, shortly after Nannie's arrival, Dovie, who had been bedridden, passed away. In pursuit of yet another husband, Nannie joined a dating service named the Diamond Circle Club and soon crossed paths with Richard L. Morton of Jamestown, North Carolina. They tied the knot in 1952 in Emporia, Kansas. Although Morton did not struggle with alcoholism, he was unfaithful. Prior to poisoning Morton, Nannie also poisoned her mother, Louisa, in January of 1953 when she moved in with them. Morton passed away 3 months later on May 19, 1953. Following Morton's death, Nannie wed Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma in June of 1953. Doss, a Nazarene minister, had tragically lost his family to a tornado in Carroll County, Arkansas. Samuel disapproved of Nannie's penchant for romance novels and stories. In September, Samuel was hospitalized with flu-like symptoms, which were diagnosed as a severe digestive tract infection. After being treated and discharged on October 5th, Samuel died on October 12, 1954. Nannie hastened his demise that evening in her eagerness to cash in the 2 life insurance policies she had taken out on him. This sudden passing raised suspicions, prompting his doctors to order an autopsy. The autopsy revealed an alarming level of arsenic in his system, leading to Nannie's swift arrest. Doss admitted to the murders of 4 husbands, her mother, her sister, her grandson, and her mother-in-law. However, the state of Oklahoma focused its prosecution solely on the case involving Samuel Doss. J. Howard Edmondson, who later served as governor of Oklahoma, led the prosecution. On May 17, 1955, Nannie Doss pled guilty and received a life sentence. The death penalty was not pursued due to her gender. Although Doss was not formally charged with the other deaths, they remained unresolved. She passed away from leukemia in the hospital ward of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1965 and was laid to rest at Oak Hill Memorial Park in McAlester, Oklahoma. Toni Jo Henry was born as Anna Beatrice McQuiston in Shreveport, Louisiana on January 3, 1916. She was the third of 5 children. During her mother's illness, she lived with her grandmother for some time. Her mother succumbed to tuberculosis when Henry was 6 years old. Afterward, she lived with her father and stepmother, but always longed to return to her grandmother's care. At 13, Henry worked part-time in a macaroni factory, but was fired when the manager discovered tuberculosis in her family. After her father beat her for losing the job, she left home and became a street hustler and prostitute, adopting the name Toni Jo Hood. She later worked in a brothel in Shreveport's red light district. During this period, Henry became addicted to cocaine and continued her trade in other parts of Louisiana and South Texas. In 1939, she met Claude Henry, one of her customers, in Austin, Texas. Claude, a down-on-his-luck prizefighter known as Cowboy, fell in love with her. They married on November 25, 1939, and honeymooned in Southern California. Upon their return from California, Claude Henry was arrested for the murder of Arthur Sinclair, a former San Antonio police officer, committed before their marriage. In January of 1940, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville. Toni Jo began devising plans to break her husband out of Huntsville prison. She recruited an accomplice, Harold Archie Burks, an ex-con and army deserter who claimed to know the penitentiary's layout. Together, they planned to rob a bank to secure funds for Claude Henry's jailbreak. They persuaded 2 teenagers to break into a gun store and steal guns and ammunition for their use. Joseph P. Calloway was delivering a Ford coupe to a friend when he encountered Toni Jo and Archie hitchhiking. Unaware of their intentions, he offered them a ride. As they drove past Jennings, Louisiana, Tony, Joe, and Archie robbed Calloway at gunpoint, locked him in the trunk, and drove down a country road. They intended to use the Ford as a getaway vehicle, but decided to pull over on a country track. They ordered Calloway out of the car, marched him into a field, and told him to strip, intending to use his clothes for Claude during the jailbreak. Calloway was then shot once in the head with a .32 caliber revolver and died on the spot. When they reached Camden, Arkansas, Archie grew concerned about how far Tony Joe would go to break her husband out of prison. He abandoned her, taking the car with him. Henry returned to Shreveport by bus, seeking refuge with her aunt Emma. She confessed to her aunt that she had murdered a man near Lake Charles, Louisiana. Emma contacted her brother, a Louisiana state trooper, leading to Henry's arrest. During an interview with a Shreveport police officer, Henry confessed to the murder and revealed the body's location. Her first trial took place from March 27th to 29th, 1940, at Calcasieu Courthouse. Due to her good looks, the potential death penalty, and the severity of the charges, the trial attracted significant media attention. Henry claimed that Burks fired the fatal shot, but the jury convicted her after 6 hours of deliberation and sentenced her to death by hanging. Burks was later convicted and also sentenced to death. Henry appealed and was granted a new trial, arguing that the trial's publicity prejudiced the outcome. The second trial occurred in February of 1941. This time, Burks testified against Henry. After an hour of deliberation, the jury again convicted her and sentenced her to death. She appealed once more and was granted another new trial. The third trial was held in January of 1942. Henry was again convicted and sentenced to death. She appealed, but her appeal was denied. An appeal to Governor Sam H. Jones for clemency also failed. While incarcerated at Lake Charles Prison, Henry was befriended by Father Wayne Richard, the head of a local Catholic parish, who eventually baptized her. During Henry's trials, Louisiana changed its execution method from hanging to electrocution. Henry's sentence was carried out on November 28, 1942, in the basement of the Calcasieu Parish Courthouse. The portable electric chair used for her execution was later used for Burke's execution in March of 1943. The district attorney for the case was Griffin T. Hawkins of Lake Charles. Father Richard was present at Henry's execution and officiated her burial a few days later. 4 days before her execution, Claude Henry escaped from prison to see his wife one last time, but was recaptured in Beaumont, Texas. Shortly afterwards, he was paroled due to ill health. While out on parole, Claude Henry was shot to death by a cafe owner on July 15, 1945, in Dallas. Born in Salisbury, Missouri in 1878, Eva Dugan later married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. However, her husband abandoned the family, leaving them destitute. During the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 to 1899, Dugan trekked north and relocated to Juneau, Alaska. There, she became a cabaret singer and worked as a prostitute to support herself and her children. Many years later, she moved to Pima County, Arizona, where she worked as a housekeeper for an elderly chicken rancher. Dugan became a live-in housekeeper for Andrew J. Mathis, a wealthy chicken ranch owner. The employer-employee relationship quickly turned quarrelsome, with frequent bickering. Mathis despised Dugan's cooking and was dissatisfied with her work, while Dugan found Mathis demanding, abrasive, and difficult to get along with. Eventually, Mathis fired Dugan and ordered her to leave his property by the next morning. On January 27, 1927, Mathis disappeared, along with some of his possessions, his Dodge Coupe, and his cash box. Neighbors reported that Dugan had attempted to sell some of Mathis's possessions before she also disappeared. The police discovered that Dugan had a father in California and a daughter in White Plains, New York. Despite Dugan's refusal to provide information about her children, the police managed to locate her daughter, but the identity of her son remained a mystery. Dugan had been married 5 times, with all of her husbands having disappeared. She sold the Dodge Coupe for $600 in Kansas City, Missouri. Her arrest came in White Plains after a postal clerk, alerted by the police, intercepted a postcard from her father in California. Dugan was extradited to Arizona to face automobile theft charges. She was convicted and subsequently imprisoned. 9 months later, in October of the same year, a camper discovered Mathis's decomposed remains on his ranch. Dugan was subsequently tried for murder in a brief trial that relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. During her testimony, Dugan stated Mathis suspected she had poisoned his breakfast, but she claimed that he had eaten rotten meat, specifically a rabbit with boils. She also admitted to having weekly sexual relations with Mathis and engaging in prostitution at the ranch. According to Dugan, Mathis would invite men from the street in Tucson to come to the ranch, where she would perform sex acts for $3, giving Mathis 50 cents from each transaction. Dugan claimed that a teenage boy named Jack, who had come to the ranch for work, accidentally killed Mathis with a retaliatory punch after Mathis beat him for refusing to milk a cow. She stated that Jack informed her of what had happened, and together they tried to revive Mathis with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation after removing his false teeth. When their efforts failed, they loaded Mathis's body into the coupe. Jack then drove the vehicle out alone to dispose of the body, returning at 5 o'clock in the morning. The prosecution convinced the jury that Dugan had murdered Mathis with an axe. After her conviction, in her final statement to the jurors, Dugan defiantly remarked, "Well, I'll die with my boots on, and in full health." She remained defiant to the end. To pay for her own coffin, Dugan gave interviews to the press for $1 each and sold embroidered handkerchiefs that she made while imprisoned. She also crafted a silk beaded jazz dress for her hanging, but later opted for a cheap dress, fearing that her silk dress might get mussed. Her upbeat demeanor led Time magazine to dub her Cheerful Eva in the March 3, 1930 article about her execution. The day before her hanging, rumors circulated that Dugan intended to kill herself. A search of her cell revealed a bottle of raw ammonia and 3 razor blades hidden in a dress, which were confiscated. Dugan's appeal for clemency on the grounds of mental illness was denied, and she was taken to the gallows at 5 a.m. on February 21, 1930. She became the first woman to be executed by the state, and it was the first execution in Arizona history to permit female witnesses. A newspaper account reported that Dugan was composed as she mounted the gallows. She instructed the guards, "Don't hold my arm so tightly. The people will think I'm afraid." She swayed slightly when the noose was placed around her neck and shook her head when asked if she had any final words. The trap was sprung at 5:11. The rope snapped her neck, decapitating her and sending her head rolling to the feet of the spectators. Blood continued to spurt from her severed neck for several minutes, causing 5 witnesses, 2 women and 3 men, to faint. Dugan was one of the last individuals to be hanged in Arizona. The gallows were replaced by the gas chamber in 1934 and later by lethal injection in 1993. As of February 2024, Dugan remains the only woman ever executed by the state of Arizona. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to join our community. We upload every Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. For more content like this, be sure to check out our other videos on the channel. You can also follow us on our other social media platforms for uploads and updates. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.